Welcome to a new episode of the Style Stories. Today, I'm going to take you back into the past and talk about Cerruti. It's not just a brand, it's not just a label, but it was a philosophy, a way of understanding fashion that was quietly radical, silk and cashmere. Jackets that don't just cover you, they know you. Italian elegance that feels effortless, intelligent and alive. This episode is about memory, craft and touch, about a house, Cerruti, that whispered while the world roared. And while understanding materials, feeling it with your hands and the foundation of a real fashion house. It's about quiet discipline, the patience and subtlety that turn garments into statements of thought and not just a spectacle. So lean in, slow down, listen carefully, because some stories are not just for the eyes, they're for the hands, the mind and the memory. There's a kind of nostalgia that sneaks up when you think about it. Not the remember when kind, but the kind that whispers that something vital was quietly slipped out of sight. When I say Cerruti, I immediately think of wool, cashmere, of jackets, suits that don't just cover you, but they seem to know you. A kind of Italian elegance that once felt effortless, poetic and alive. But ask someone born after 2000 who's Cerruti, and you might hear, well, it sounds familiar, or even, well, wasn't that a perfume? And that, yes, it was right, and exactly it still is perfume today. Because some names in fashion are more than labels. They're philosophies, language, ways of being, and Cerruti is one of those names. Even if the world seems to have quietly filed it into some form of between memory and misunderstanding, Cerruti is a story about people, craft, and timing, about the delicate tension between artistry, industry and commerce that makes fashion exhilarating and heartbreakingly fragile. Founded in 1881, Nino Cerruti took over the company in his 40s. He was not simply a designer or a tailor or a weaver of refinement. He made the house synonymous with a specific kind of elegance, understated, intelligent, modern, yet rooted in deep tradition. It was in the 60s and the 70s that Cerruti was just a label. It was a label for those who understood the clothing that could be luxurious without being loud, Italian, and without being theatrical, powerful without being aggressive. Cerruti didn't just dress you, he wore you. He whispered confidence, he spoke about fluently, languages and quiet authority. And here's the paradox. If Dior, Chanel are kings and queens, Cerruti was the brilliant duke who never quite made it to the throne, but whose influence quietly shaped the kingdom anyway. In the 80s and the 90s, Hollywood and Wimbledon discovered Cerruti. Powerful, enigmatic characters on screen and tennis players wore not just his jackets, his suits, but understood in depth who he was and gave them character. But then the landscape shifted. Conglomerates grew, logos became louder, entertainment became strategy. And the myth and the bigger equals, better, started to dominate the narrative. Cerruti faced the question that many heritage houses face. How do you remain relevant without betraying your core? The fashion industry loves drama. It loves heroes, collapses, reinvention, scandals, spectacle. Cerruti whispered, and whispers tend to get drowned in applause. What made Cerruti exceptional wasn't just the tailoring or the fabrics, though they were extraordinary. It was his philosophy. A quiet conversation between you and your wardrobe, between intention and presence. Imagine a jacket that doesn't scream, that doesn't beg for validation, that doesn't chase virality, but makes people lean in and say, that's Cerruti, understated, disciplined, confident enough not to perform. And here's the irony. In the world of addicted to spectacle, that restraint became almost invisible. Cerruti didn't fight to be loud. He didn't need to chase clicks. It demanded patience, and patience is no longer trendy. Now, let me take you on a personal story. Because for me, this isn't just a historical reflection. It's a living memory. I met him in Milan, thanks to a friend. She told me he was looking for somebody new in the design office. Someone who could understand language of the house without turning it into noise. I got dressed up. I was wearing a suit, of course. Went to the interview. I was curious, but not really fully aware of what was going on. He hired me immediately. It took him 5 minutes. Just like that, a conversation, an exchange of glances, and that was it. And the adventure that began in 1997, what I thought might be a chapter, became 14 years of my life, and it was great fun. 14 years inside a house that didn't just produce garments, it cultivated thinking. For every beginning environment, there was incredibly stimulating, not chaotic, not ego-driven, stimulating in a way that sharp minds challenge you. Every detail mattered. And when I say every detail, I mean every detail. The weight of the yarn, the colour, the millimetres, the shoulder line, the tension on the knit structure, and the way the light hit the lapel, 10 a.m. in the morning or 3 p.m. in the afternoon. Nino was precise, extremely precise, detail-oriented, in a way that today might feel almost radical. But here's what people don't often understand. He was also gentle, kind, and conversational and human. There was no tyrannical genius energy, no shouting, no theatrics. You could speak your mind, you could make your process, you could disagree, and fashion is rare. About once a month, I would travel up to Paris and make the sample collections. To Milan, back to Paris, back to Milan, a rhythm that became part of my creative bloodstream. Paris wasn't glamorous tourism, it was work. Intense fittings, adjustments, revisions, refinements. It was touching garments and asking, is that enough? And asking, shall we do it again? Or do we have to do it again? With Nino, I threw myself into the managing of the knitwear division of Cerruti. And knitwear at the time was not decorative, it was strategic. We pushed boundaries. Can you believe that, in knitwear? We developed pieces that for the first time in the era were completely avant-garde, not loud, avant-garde, not conceptual for applause, but texturally forward. We experimented with yarn blends that shifted structures, knit jackets that held architectural precision, sweaters that were blurred with lines between softness and tailoring, pieces that didn't look revolutionary at the first glance but really were. And that's the difference. Revolution doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides in construction. I remember the late nights reviewing prototypes, debating the density of the stitch, adjusting proportions. That moment people would never consciously understand. But we noticed, and those other details were noticed too. They were everything. Those 14 years reshaped me. I even managed to have 2 kids whilst I was working for Cerruti. They taught me that elegance was discipline, that creativity is patience, that innovation without integrity is just noise. Cerruti's runway shows were never about spectacle. They were about looking good, feeling good. They were about clarity, and they were also the times before influencers moved in, before live streams, before front row content strategies were invented. The collections landed quietly, like a sigh that said, I understand this. While other houses built theatrical universes, Cerruti refined silhouette, balanced proportions, perfected fabric drapes, no viral moments, no shock value, no chaos, just engineered craft work. And before we close this chapter, a note for what's coming next. In our next episode, we will be looking at the atelier, behind the world of decor, embellishment, and the art of adornment. Sounds fascinating, huh? From embroidery to applique to surfaces to storytelling, we'll explore how fashion extends beyond silhouette into imagination itself. And this time, I will be happy to welcome you to a series of guests, professional industrialists and people working in the business, and they'll be able to show you the works that blur crafts, luxury, and pure wonder. They will show us how decoration is not just a surface beauty, but a language that communicates culture, memory, and vision. So subscribe, follow us, and stay tuned, because the story of fashion never ends. It just keeps transforming itself. One detail, one ornament, one conversation at a time. And this is the Style Icon Stories.